dressed the same, sit in front of the same kind of game. Yeah, he was just that kind of guy. And then one day he goes and kills us all. He couldn't even be original about the way he did it.
Okay, I know what you're probably thinking. PT? How am I supposed to make a whole video about a game that's basically just a hallway? And honestly, that's exactly what I thought. Because when you actually sit down and think about PT, it's kind of ridiculous. You walk down a hallway, you turn around, you walk down the hallway again, and something weird happens, you do it again. And somehow people have been talking about this game for over a decade. But the more I looked into it, the more I realized that hallway isn't really the interesting part. The interesting part is why this hallway exists at all. Because PT wasn't supposed to be the game. It was supposed to make you play a completely different game. And that game never came out. So let's go back to 2014. You turn on your PS4, you go into the PlayStation Store, and there's this free horror game called PT. No giant Silent Hill logo, no Hideo Kojima, fuck, I don't know how to pronounce that. No Norman Reedus, nothing, just PT. And a weird developer called 7780 Studio, which, looking back, is obviously suspicious. But at the same time, people didn't really know what they were downloading. And that's important. Because PT wasn't announced like a normal game, it was basically a secret. Kojima wanted the player to discover what they were actually playing. He even described the idea as making a playable version of a movie trailer, which is actually a pretty cool idea. Instead of watching a trailer and thinking, yeah, that looks cool, you actually play the trailer. And then the game reveals what it is advertising. And when you first start PT, nothing really happens. You're in a room, you walk through a door, and then you see this. A hallway. That's it. And you might be thinking, okay, when does the game start? But that's the trick. The hallway is the game. You walk through it, you reach the end, you go through the door, and then you're back at the beginning, so you do it again. Except now, the hallway is different. Maybe a light is on, maybe a door is open, maybe there's a sound you didn't hear before. And eventually, you notice something that wasn't there before. Lisa. And this is where PT gets really good. Because the game doesn't need to chase you around. It just needs to make you wonder, was she there the last time? And after a while, you stop trusting the hallway. You know the layout, you walked through it 50 times, you know where everything is, which should make it less scary, but it does the opposite. Because now you notice every tiny change. The radio, the pictures, the door, the sound, the bathroom. And suddenly, you're not playing the game normally anymore. You're checking everything, you're looking at the floor, you start looking at pictures, you're turning around every 5 seconds. You're basically playing like this. Please don't be behind me. And that is probably the smartest thing PT does. It gets you to scare yourself. Now here's where I started wondering something. Why hide the fact that this was Silent Hill? Because they could have just put Silent Hill on the front. People would download it anyways, but instead, they made up an entire fake studio, 7780 Studio. They made PT look like some random horror game, and they let people figure it out, which means the internet basically became a part of the marketing campaign. People were asking, what is this? Who made this? Why is this so weird? How do I finish it? And eventually, someone would have to figure out what PT actually was. And they did. The whole thing suddenly made sense. You finally get through the nightmare puzzles. The game starts doing its thing. And then, you see a random guy walking down the street. At first you're probably thinking, who is this? And then the camera moves. And then you realize, Norman fucking Reedus. And then the title, Silent Hill. And that is the moment PT goes from this weird horror demo to, wait, they're actually making this? Because now we know what the whole thing was for. It wasn't just some random experiment. It was an advertising to the next Silent Hill. And the people behind it was Hideo Kojima and Guillermo del Toro. Fuck, dude. With Norman Reedus attached to the project. Suddenly, the little hallway meant a lot more. And this is probably the biggest reason PT is still remembered. Because people didn't want PT, they wanted to know what came next. What would Silent Hill actually be like? Would it look like PT? Would it be first person? Would Lisa be in the final game? Would the weird puzzles continue? What else had Kojima and Del Toro planned? We don't really know, and that's kinda the frustrating part. Because PT gives you enough to make your imagination fill out the blanks. And then, that is where it ends. In 2015, things started to fall apart between Kojima and Konami. Kojima was preparing to leave the company and Silent Hill was caught in the middle of everything. Then Guillermo del Toro reveals that the project wasn't happening. Norman Reedus also said that the game had been cancelled, and shortly after that, Konami officially confirmed it. Silent Hill was dead. And honestly, that's already a pretty depressing ending. But then something happened that made PT itself even more interesting. PT was removed from the PlayStation Store, so this little teaser that millions of people had downloaded was suddenly gone. Sony has announced that it had been downloaded over 1 million times, and now you couldn't even go back and get it. And that's when PT went from being a demo to being this weird place of gaming history. Because think about it, how strange it is. The thing that PT was advertising doesn't exist, and eventually even PT itself wasn't normally available anymore. So all we're left with is this tiny piece that could have been. And this is where I think the title of the video gets a little funny, because did we actually forgot PT? Probably not. If you're watching this, there's a pretty good chance you remember it. But I think we forgot what PT actually was. It wasn't supposed to be some legendary horror game. It wasn't supposed to become this massive mystery. It was basically a really strange advertisement. And yet, the advertisement became more memorable than the thing that it was advertising. That's kinda crazy. And maybe that's why PT still works. Because there isn't a huge amount of game there. There's no 30-hour story, there's no massive world, there's barely even a world at all. It's just a hallway. But that hallway is enough to make you imagine everything that could be behind this next door. And then you remember, there was supposed to be an entire game after this. A game we're probably never going to play. So when people talk about PT, they're not just talking about a horror demo. They're talking about a game that almost existed. And that is what makes PT so interesting. So, I don't really think PT is the horror game you forgot. I think it's the horror game we never got to forget. Because every time somebody mentions Silent Hill, someone eventually brings up PT. Every time someone talks about Kojima, PT comes up. And every time someone asks, what could Silent Hill have been? We're right back here, looking at the same hallway, wondering what was supposed to be on the other side of that door. And honestly, I kinda wish we got to find out.